Hello everyone, my name is Ben Westerlund, and throughout the course of the spring semester, I have been actively researching systemic disinvestment within Baltimore City's public resources, spanning from the years 1890 to 1968. During this 70-plus year period, I focused primarily upon how discriminatory housing and lending policies, which were implemented by both public and private institutions, left an indelible mark on the sociological landscape of Baltimore City, impacting both quality of life indicators, as well as the total amount of municipal funds allocated towards public works projects within formerly red line areas. So as this topic has been widely researched before, I hope to build upon other researchers who have coined the term black butterfly and white owl to describe how discriminatory lending and housing policies implemented during the latter half of the 20th century fostered economic division and hyper-segregation across Baltimore ensuing the end of the Second War. In doing this, I attempted to contextualize the changes and continuities in discriminatory housing and lending policies on a national and local level through a socio-historical lens, in hopes of giving a better understanding of the sociological motives for the policies enacted during this time, how these policies began to change in an attempt to circumvent court rulings, and how just the lasting legacy of discriminatory housing and lending policies and their effects on Baltimore's current, social landscape. So I'll just quickly go over this. So Baltimore was experiencing immense growth during the late 19th century, early 20th century, resulting in the population increasing by nearly 3 times, causing Baltimore to become the third largest city in the United States during that time. And this was caused primarily by Baltimore serving as an economic hub for trade due to the city's close proximity to the Chesapeake Bay, as well as the prominent role that the B&O Railroad played in fostering kind of trade within the United States during this time. And because of the increase in population, as well as the city's lack of municipal resources and public infrastructure to deal with the increase in population, Baltimore was experiencing large outbreaks of tuberculosis within the city each year, causing 1,000 deaths per year. So as Baltimore's population increased, so did tuberculosis numbers, and during this time, the African-American community within Baltimore was scapegoated for those problems, leading to white segregationists as well as 20th century progressives advocating for a safer and more sanitary environment by essentially quarantining Baltimore's African-American population within parts of the city, causing the enactment of the West Ordinance. And the West Ordinance was essentially exclusionary zoning that prohibited members of certain races from moving into blocks of the city. And this would eventually be overturned in 1917 with Buchanan versus Worley, which challenged Louisville's segregation ordinance, which was premised off of Baltimore's. Following the Buchanan versus Worley ruling, people started using privatized loopholes to implement segregation throughout Baltimore, as well as the nation as a whole. Throughout Baltimore, racially restrictive covenants, slum clearing, and building code violations were used to extend segregation. So while privatized forms of segregation were being utilized throughout the United States, the Great Depression was also happened later on, and those privatized forms of discrimination were acting concurrently with these new forms of discrimination, which were formed from the Homeowners Loan Corporation as well as the Housing Division of Public Works. And the Homeowners Loan Corporation pretty much created redlining maps which demarcated areas of the city as being desirable and undesirable, taking into consideration the neighborhood's demographic makeup, the age of the building as well as the population density of that area. However, it was primarily used, the ethnic demographics of that area were primarily used to indicate whether someone would be granted a home or not. And the Housing Division of Public Works focused primarily on creating subsidized housing and other infrastructure throughout Baltimore City. And during this time, the city engaged in lots of slum clearing, which caused displacement for lots of African American families throughout Baltimore City. So these policies were exacerbated by the GI Bill, which was put into place following the Second World War. In turn, this caused widespread suburbanization throughout the United States and white flight throughout Baltimore, resulting in Baltimore's population to decrease during this period in a trend that would continue into the 1960s. And this was primarily caused by cheap and affordable housing being available in the suburbs, which with the GI Bill offered returning veterans a minimum down payment of $39.21. However, these housing opportunities were not extended to returning African American veterans, who only made up less than 1% of the total loans made during this period, which stands in stark contrast to the over 3 million loans made to returning veterans following the end of the Second World War. In turn, this was attributed to the servicemen's readjustment loans being authorized by the FHA, who linked the insertion of restrictive housing covenants to the eligibility of federal mortgage insurance, disqualifying many African Americans from obtaining these loans and profiting from the GI Bill following the Second World War. So why is it important? So although Shelley versus Kramer struck down racially restrictive covenants and Jones versus Alfred made discriminatory housing practices illegal, Baltimore still faces disinvestment within formerly red line areas, resulting in higher rates of poverty, disparities in education levels, and medium household income, as well as life expectancy, which I mentioned earlier. And these all follow trends which were outlined by redlining maps.